Hello, thank you for watching our CDL Study Guide review video. Today we will be covering section 10, specifically related to driving a school bus. So here we have section 10 related to driving a school bus. First thing to make note is this grayed out section here. It says this section is designated primarily as an information and study guide for all individuals who are interested in obtaining the federal school bus endorsement for their CDL to drive a yellow school bus nationwide. The state of Illinois also requires all drivers who transport school-age children to and from school or for curriculum activities, regardless of the size of vehicle, to obtain a school bus permit. And so both drivers for our Division I vehicles and our school buses must be familiar with this section. While some of the content is school bus specific, it is still important for those who are driving Division I vehicles to know this and be able to pass this test in order to get their school bus permit. And so for the purposes of this review, keep in mind that we are preparing or thinking of driving a school bus, regardless of if you are preparing to drive Division I or a yellow school bus. I will go through and highlight the sections that we know are most likely on the test. I will go through this, but feel free to, if you need to revisit any particular section or make sure your highlights are accurate with what is in the video, feel free to go back and rewatch that section. So to start, we're going to take a look at 10.1.1, specifically danger zones. You'll see it says that the danger zone is the area on all sides of the bus where children are in the most danger of being hit, either by another vehicle or their own bus. The danger zones may extend as much as 30 feet from the front bumper, with the first 10 feet being the most dangerous. 10 feet from the left and right sides of the bus and 10 feet behind the rear bumper of the school bus. In addition, there are areas to the left of the bus that are always considered dangerous because of passing cars. And you can see that represented in figure 10.1. As we go through this section, as with any section in the CDL study guide, anytime there are specific numbers, make sure you pay attention to those, as those will most likely be on the test. So make sure you're familiar with specifically the danger zones being 30 feet from the front bumper, with specifically the first 10 feet being the most dangerous. When we learn about our mirrors, we'll see that we have particular mirrors that we use so that we can see the front of our bus. But again, it's important to know that the most dangerous part is 10 feet in front, 10 feet left and right, and 10 feet behind the rear bumper. So take a look at figure 10.1, which shows you that when we are loading and unloading children, we always do it on the right side of the bus and on the right side of the road. And so it's important to know that there may be times where vehicles do not stop on our left, even though for school buses specifically, we have a stop arm that comes out to tell people to stop. And so as a bus driver, we should make sure that we are keeping an eye on all of these danger zones, specifically the danger from passing cars, to ensure that they have stopped before any children cross in front of the bus. Next, on page 126, let's take a look at 10.1.3, the outside left and right side flat mirrors. Specifically, it's important to note that the blind spot behind the bus extends 50 to 150 feet and could extend up to 400 feet, depending on the length and width of the bus. You'll also want to ensure that the mirrors are properly adjusted so that you can see 200 feet or 4 bus lengths behind the bus, along the sides of the bus, and the rear tires touching the ground. So this is particularly pertaining to your left and right side flat mirrors. And you'll see that figure 10.2 shows you how both the outside left and outside right mirrors should be adjusted. And you'll see that in figure 10.2 on page 125. Flat mirrors are pretty common on all vehicles. So if you've driven a car, chances are you're familiar with the flat mirrors. But as a school bus, we do have a variety of other mirrors. The next one that you should be familiar with is 10.1.4, the outside left and right convex mirrors. These mirrors are located below the outside flat mirrors, so make sure you know specifically where they are located. The left and right sides show a wide angle. It's important to also note that these do not accurately reflect the size and distance from the bus. These convex mirrors we've learned about previously in the section 2. We learned that they could also be called crossover, they could also be called bug eye or fish eye, as they are rounded. And it's that rounded shape that allows you to see a wider angle. You should adjust these mirrors to see the entire side of the bus up to the mirror mounts, the front of the rear tires touching the ground, and at least one traffic lane on either side of the bus. So then we have our crossover mirrors. So these crossover mirrors are going to be mounted on both the left and right front corners of the bus. So knowing specifically where these are located is important. It's important to know that these are used to see the front bumper danger zone directly in front of the bus that's not visible by direct vision. And so these crossover mirrors are rounded and they stick out at the front of your bus. They really do allow you to see what is directly in front of your rear or front bumper, I should say, your front bumper. It's also important to know that these are curved or convex in a way, so they do not accurately reflect size or distance from the bus. And as a bus driver, we should be making sure we are properly adjusting these so that we can see accordingly. Here it says you should ensure that your mirrors are properly adjusted so that you can see these things. So make note of these bullet points, specifically the entire area in front of the bus from the front bumper at ground level to a point where direct vision is possible. You're also making sure that you see right and left front tires on the ground in the area from the front of the bus to the service door. Make note of this last paragraph here that says the driver should look at these mirrors along with the convex and flat mirrors in a logical sequence to ensure that a child or object is not in any of the danger zones. Figure 10.4, which is on page 127, shows you essentially your left and right side crossover mirrors and the vision that you are able to have from those. So make note of that. It's a little helpful visual. Next, we have the overhead inside rear view mirror. This is going to be the mirror that's mounted directly above the windshield on the driver's side of the bus. It's important to know that this mirror is specifically used to monitor passenger activity inside the bus. So it's not like your typical rear view mirror in your car that is used to see vehicles behind you. Because we have a large blind spot behind us, we cannot see vehicles that are in that blind spot, but that is not what this rear view mirror is used for. This rear view mirror, we also may call it the child check mirror or child monitor mirror, because that is what we are doing specifically in the school bus, is keeping an eye on children on our bus. It says it may provide limited visibility directly in back of the bus, but if the bus is equipped with a glass bottom rear emergency door. Some of our shorter buses that we have, you may be able to see a vehicle if it's right up on your bumper using this mirror. But again, that's not what this mirror is primarily used for. It's important to note that there's a blind spot directly behind the driver's seat, as well as a large blind spot area that begins at the rear bumper that could extend up to 400 feet or more behind the bus. So you must use your exterior side mirrors to monitor traffic that approaches and enters in this area. You're using this overhead inside rear view mirror to, again, keep an eye on and check on your passengers. It says here you should position your mirror to see the top of the rear window in the top of the mirror, and all students, including the heads of the students, right behind you. So that covers the different types of mirrors that we have in our bus. Let's now talk about the loading and unloading process. Now I'm just going to hit the highlights. Again, make sure that you are reading through this entire section in detail, but I'm just going to hit the key highlights. So Let's take a look at 10.2, specifically loading and unloading. I want you to make note that it says more students are killed while getting on or off a school bus each year than are killed as passengers inside the school bus. It's important to know that our school buses are very safe vehicles, not just because of their size, or their weight, but their height, and they are easily visible. So it's important to know that when students are loading and unloading, this is a very important time where we should make sure that we are keeping an eye on our passengers. It specifically says that this section 10.2, is going to give you specific procedures to follow to help us avoid unsafe conditions that could result in injuries or fatalities during the loading and unloading process. So let's start with the first part of this process, which is approaching the stop. Make note specifically of all of these bullet points when approaching the stop, knowing what you should do. Specifically, make note of the fourth bullet point where it says, if the school bus is so equipped, activate alternating flashing amber warning lights at least 200 feet or 100 feet in an urban area, or approximately 5 to 10 seconds before the school bus stop, in accordance with state law. Our buses do have this 8-way flashing system. When we activate the system, it lets other vehicles know that we are going to start the either loading or unloading process. When we activate this system, the first part of the system are these alternating flashing amber lights at the top of the bus. There's 2 on the front and 2 on the back. Then once we open the service door, a couple automatic things happen. First is that for our buses, a stop arm comes out on the left side to notify drivers of other cars that they should stop because children may be crossing the road. The other thing that happens is those alternating amber flashing lights shift from being amber to the inner red lights. And these red lights are both on the front and the back of the bus. And they are specifically letting people know you must stop, keep an eye out, children are in the process of loading and unloading. And so we start this process of using this 8-way flashing system about 100 to 300 feet. It says here you activate it at least 200 feet, 100 in an urban area. So 200 feet in a rural area, 100 feet in an urban area. Those are important numbers to make note of. And then your turn signal indicator. So letting the vehicles behind you and in front of you know that you are about to pull off to the side, or you're about to stop to pick up or load and unload passengers. You turn your turn signal on between 100 and 300 feet before you begin pulling over. So make note of those 2 bullet points. It says when stopping, bring the school bus to a full stop with the front bumper at least 10 feet away from students at the designated stop. So it's important to note that you are stopping well before where students are standing because you do not want to risk hitting any children. The next bullet point says place the transmission in park. If there's no park, place in neutral and set the parking brake at each stop. This is part of what we go through and learn during the behind the wheel training, but it's important to note that you do shift into park or shift into neutral and engage the parking brake prior to students loading or unloading the bus. This ensures the vehicle does not move and reduces the risk of a student being hit. Next, it says activate alternating red lights when traffic is a safe distance from the school bus to ensure the stop arm is extended. For our buses, this is an automatic process that happens when we open the service door. And then finally, make a final check to see that all traffic has stopped before completely opening the door and signaling students to approach. Sometimes people do not pay attention to the stop sign, and sometimes they blow right past the bus. And so we want to make sure there are no risks to our students as they're loading and unloading. Over on page 128, 10.2.2, loading procedures. Make sure you're familiar with all of these bullet points and the hashes as this goes through the specific loading process. Specifically, make note of the loading procedures, essentially the same wherever you load students, but there are slight differences when students are loading at the school campus. Some things to keep in mind. 10.2.3 talks about the unloading procedures on the route. Make sure you're familiar with this process. Make note that if you have missed a student's unloading stop, do not back up, but be sure to follow local procedures. So there may be one or more questions on the test that have you answer or select a multiple choice answer based on whether it's a loading procedure or unloading procedure. So make sure you read through each of these bullet points and are familiar with that process. Then it says additional procedures for students who must cross the roadway. It says you should understand what students should do when exiting a school bus and crossing the street in front of the bus. In addition, the school bus driver should understand the students might not always do what they're supposed to do. And so we want to make note of these following points. Specifically, if a student or students must cross the roadway, they should follow these procedures. Make note of these numbers. They should walk approximately 10 feet away from the bus. They should walk to a location at least 10 feet in front of the right corner of the bumper. And they should stop at the right edge of the roadway. And you should be able to see the student's feet. The next thing to make note of is when students reach the edge of the roadway, they should do the following things: stop and look, make sure the roadway is clear, check to see if the red flashing lights on the bus are still flashing, and wait for your signal before crossing the roadway. And then upon your signal, students should cross far enough in front of the school bus to be in your view, walk to the left edge of the school bus, stop and look again for your signal to continue to cross the roadway. Then look for traffic in both directions, make sure it's clear, and proceed across the roadway, continuing to look in all directions. So there are specific unloading procedures when at the school. So make note of these specific procedures, specifically these bullet points and dashes. There are special dangers to consider when loading and unloading. So make note of these special conditions, special dangers. The first is going to be dropped or forgotten objects. So you always focus on the students as they approach the bus and watch for anyone who disappears from sight. They may be dropping down to pick up an object that they have dropped. We want to keep an eye on that. The other thing is going to be handrail hangups. Students have been injured or killed when clothing, accessories, or even parts of their body get caught on the handrail of the door as they are exiting. So you should closely observe all students exiting the bus to ensure that they're in a safe location prior to moving the bus. Let's take a look at 10.2.6 post-trip instructions. Specifically, when you are done with your route, when your trip is finished, you conduct what's called a post-trip inspection of the bus. You should walk through the bus and around the bus looking for the following: articles left on the bus, sleeping students, open windows and doors, mechanical operational problems, damage, or vandalism. Specifically, you will hear us remind people to check for sleeping students. We even have a sign as you go back around the corner to the back of our lot at North Shore Transit that specifically reminds you, have you checked for sleeping children? So we do this post-trip inspection and we record any problems or issues by writing out a maintenance form, preventative maintenance request. 10.3 talks about emergency exit evacuations. So specifically, we want to make note that it's important we know or we have a plan for if we do have to evacuate. It says here that an emergency situation can happen to anyone, anytime, or anywhere. It could be a crash, a stalled school bus. It could be an electrical fire, so a variety of things. And so knowing what to do in an emergency before, during, and after an evacuation can mean the difference between life and death. So 10.3.1 specifically dives into planning for emergencies. Specifically, when do you determine the need to evacuate the bus? So a couple things that I want to make note of here. It says, as a general rule, student safety and control are best maintained by keeping students on the bus during an emergency or an impending crisis situation. if so doing does not expose them to unnecessary risk or injury. So remember, the decision to evacuate the bus must be a timely one. So it's important to note that sometimes the bus may be the safest place for an emergency unless the emergency is within the bus or involving the bus specifically. It says a decision to evacuate should include consideration of the following conditions. Is there a fire or danger of fire? Is there leaking fuel? Is there a chance the bus could be hit by another vehicle? Is it in the path of a tornado or rising water? So all these are things that must be considered as you are determining whether it should be safe to evacuate or not. It explains that there are also mandatory evacuations. So when the driver must evacuate the bus when it is on fire or threat of fire, when it's stalled or is adjacent to a railroad highway crossing. The position of the bus may change and increase the danger, then you need to evacuate. If there's imminent danger of collision, there is a need, or if there's a need to quickly evacuate because of hazardous materials being spilled. So make sure you read through these bullet points for when to evacuate so that you are able to respond to any questions related to that. Now 10.3.2 talks about the evacuation procedures. It says be prepared and plan ahead. When possible, assign 2 responsible older student assistants to each emergency exit and teach them how to assist the other students off the bus. You assign another student assistant to lead the students to a safe place after the evacuation. Now, they go through and share with you some tips to determining a safe place. I want you to make note of all of these bullet points, but specifically where it says a safe place will be at least 100 feet off the road in the direction of oncoming traffic. This will keep the students from being hit by the debris if another vehicle comes and collides with the bus. It also says that you should lead students upwind of the bus at least 300 feet if there's a risk from spilled hazardous materials. So make note of those numbers. So 100 feet in the direction of oncoming traffic, 300 feet if there's a risk of spilled hazardous materials. So make note of those. Here are some just general procedures when determining if evacuation is in the best interest of safety. So make sure you read through these bullet points and dashes. Next, we talk about railroad highway crossings. 10.4.1 talks about types of crossings. It's important to know that there are passive crossings, and we learned about this in section 2. But if you've not read section 2, or you don't need to read section 2 because you're just completing this for your school bus permit, it's important to know there are 2 types of crossing. So the first is a passive crossing that does not have any type of traffic control device. And so you must stop at these crossings and follow proper procedures, and the decision to proceed rests entirely on you. Passive crossings require that you recognize the crossing, search for any train using the tracks, and decide if there's sufficient space to cross safely. Passive crossings have a yellow circular advanced warning sign, pavement markings, and crossbucks to assist you in recognizing the crossing. Then we have active crossings. So knowing the definition of an active crossing will help you in case they ask any questions about these. So an active crossing has a traffic control device installed at the crossing to regulate traffic there at the crossing. These active devices include flashing red lights with or without bells, and flashing red lights with bells and gates. So those are active crossings. Next, on page 132, it dives into warning signs and devices. And again, this may be somewhat repetitive if you've already read section 2. But again, if this is your only section you need to read to get your school bus permit, then this will be new for you. So make sure you pay attention to the types of warning signs. So first is going to be the advanced warning sign. This is going to be a round black on yellow warning sign placed ahead of a public railroad highway crossing. It's important to know that this advanced warning tells you to slow down and look and listen for a train and be prepared to stop on the tracks. Next, we have our pavement markings. So these pavement markings essentially mean the same as the advanced warning sign. These pavement markings consist of an X with the letters R and R. and a no passing marking on 2-lane roads. There's also a no passing zone sign on 2-lane roads. There may be a white stop line painted on the pavement before the railroad tracks, and the front of the bus must remain behind this white line while stopped at the crossing. That way to ensure no chances of collision. And figure 10.6 shows you the pavement markings. Figure 10.5 shows you that round yellow warning sign, at least what it looks like. Next, we have crossbuck signs. And so knowing specifically that these are signs that mark the crossing, and they require you to yield the right of way to the train. And a sign below the crossbuck indicates the number of tracks. And there's an example of that in figure 10.7. So you can see how many tracks you will be crossing prior to crossing. Next, we have flashing red light signals. So there are many highway rail grade crossings where the crossbuck sign has a flashing light. And so this will include red lights and possibly even bells to let you know that a train is approaching. We have gates that may come down in some cases, and it's important to note that you stop when the lights begin to flash and before the gate lowers across the road lane, and you remain stopped until the gate goes up. If the gate does not go up after the train passes, then call dispatch and ask for further instructions. 10.4.3 talks through the recommended procedures. Specifically on a school bus, it talks through the procedures for approaching the crossing, at the crossing, and crossing the track. Make sure you're familiar with each of these bullet points, which are at the end of page 132 and over on page 133, as you may have a variety of questions that ask you about crossing railroad tracks. Pay attention specifically to the second paragraph here that says a school bus is one of the safest vehicles on the highway. However, a school bus does not have the slightest edge when involved in a crash with a train. Because of the train's size and weight, it cannot stop quickly. An emergency escape route does not exist for a train. You can prevent school bus or train crashes by following these recommended procedures. So specifically knowing what you do when you approach the crossing. You slow down, you shift into a lower gear, and you activate your hazard lights approximately 200 feet before the crossing. You scan your surroundings, you listen for any approaching train, and you choose an escape route in the event of brake failure or problems behind you. Once you get you're at the crossing, you stop no closer than 15 feet and no farther than 50 feet from the nearest rail, where you have the best visibility of the tracks. You place the transmission in park, and if there is no park, you then place it into neutral, and you set the parking brake. You turn off all radios and noisy equipment and silence the passengers. In our school buses, we have what's called a noise kill switch that you turn on that turns off all the noisy equipment. You open your service door and your driver's window to look and listen for an approaching train. After you've determined no train is approaching, you close the service door, proceed with caution. Specifically, crossing the track, check the crossing signals again before proceeding. Add a multiple track crossing, stop only before the first set of tracks. When you're sure no train is approaching on any track, proceed across all of the tracks until you've completely cleared them. You cross the tracks in low gear and do not change gears while crossing. If the gate comes down after you have started, drive through, even if it means you will break the gate. So even in automatic vehicles, like our school buses at North Shore Transit, we shift down into the low gear before crossing railroad tracks and then shift back into our drive gear after we have crossed. But it's important to know you do not change gears while crossing, as that risks a possible stall. 10.4.4 special situations. Make note that if a bus stalls or is trapped on the tracks, it's important that you move everyone far from the bus at an angle both away from the tracks and toward the train. And we do this so that if there is a collision, the collision will go in the direction the train is moving, And so we move people back towards the train because that will be away from the impact and collision. Also make note that if there is law enforcement at the crossing, that it's important that you obey the officer's directions. If you have an obstructed view of the tracks, it's important that you be especially careful at passive crossings, which don't have any type of traffic control device. Even if there are active railroad signals that indicate the tracks are clear, you still must look and listen to be ensured it is safe to proceed. And then containment or storage areas. And we're not talking about a storage room, we're talking about the space that's needed for your vehicle on the other side of the tracks. It says, if it will not fit, do not commit. Know the length of your bus and the size of the containment area at highway rail crossings on the school bus route, as well as any crossing you encounter in the course of a school activity trip. It says, when approaching a crossing with a signal or stop sign on the opposite side, pay attention to how much room there is. Be certain the bus has enough containment or storage area to completely clear the railroad tracks on the other side if there is a need to stop. As a general rule, add 15 feet to the length of the school bus to determine an acceptable amount of containment or storage area. So there may be times where there is not just a stop sign, there might be a stop light on the other side of railroad tracks. And you must visually make sure that your bus can make it all the way over the tracks before you make that decision to go. You must make sure you can either make it through that light or that there's enough room for you to stop at that stop sign before, so that your bus is not locked or on the rail line. So then we have student management, and we'll learn a lot more about student management and student behavior as you go through additional training with North Shore Transit, but just a few things to make note of that might be on the test. Specifically note that if there's a behavior problem on the bus, you wait until the students unloading are safely off the bus and have moved away. And if necessary, pull the bus over to handle the problem. In handling serious problems, here are some tips that you should be familiar with. Make sure you're familiar with each of these bullet points. It's important to know that you are not kicking students off the bus. It is important to note that you also are not necessarily responsible for ensuring that students obey rules once they are off the bus. But you are there to ensure that everyone is safe, and you are to report anytime students do not follow rules, directions, or safety procedures. Specifically, if students are misbehaving on the bus, it's one thing you can do is you can change seating or provide or require assigned seating and have that student move closer to you so you can keep an eye on them. It says here, you never put a student off the bus except at school or at their designated school bus stop. If you believe that the offense is serious enough that you cannot safely drive the bus, call for a school administrator or the police to come and remove the student. Always follow our state and local procedures for requesting assistance. And so for this, your first call will be to dispatch. Next, it talks about anti-lock braking systems, which again is another section that's covered in section 2. But if you've not read section 2, because you only have to read section 10, then make note of what anti-lock braking systems are, what they do. So specifically make note of 10.6.1, vehicles required to have anti-lock braking systems. These are going to be air brake vehicles or hydraulically braked trucks and buses with a gross vehicle weight of 10,000 pounds or more, built after March 1st, 1999. So because of that, our buses meet that second requirement. So they do have an anti-lock braking system. So next it says how ABS helps you, 10.6.2. When you brake hard on slippery surfaces in a vehicle without ABS, your wheels may lock up. When your steering wheels lock up, you lose steering control. When your other wheels lock up, you may skid or even spin the vehicle. So specifically make note of what happens when your wheels lock up. So if your steering wheels lock up, you lose steering control. When other wheels lock up, you may skid. And so know that correlation, as there may be a question on the test about that. So ABS helps you prevent skidding, helps prevent your vehicle wheels from locking up. So it says ABS helps you to avoid wheel lockup and maintain control. You may or may not be able to stop faster with ABS, but you should be able to steer around an obstacle while braking and avoid skids caused by overbraking. So what do you do when you're braking with ABS? Well, when you drive a vehicle with ABS, an anti-lock braking system, you should brake as you always have. So another way to say this is you should brake normally. So use only the braking force necessary to stop safely and stay in control. Brake the same way regardless of whether you have ABS on the bus or not. However, in emergency situations, do not pump the brakes on a bus with ABS. As you slow down, monitor your bus and back off the brakes if it is safe to do so to stay in control. So 10.6.4 talks about if braking if your anti-lock braking system is not working. And just again, a reminder, without ABS, you still have normal brake functions. So you drive and brake as you always have. And so anti-lock braking systems are in addition to your brakes, just to help prevent those brakes from locking up. But if you do not have your ABS system functioning, you still have brakes. And that's what this reminder is here at the bottom of 10.6.4. Remember, if your ABS malfunctions, you still have regular brakes. Drive normally and get the system serviced soon. 10.6.5 talks about safety reminders, specifically regarding ABS. So make sure you're familiar with all of these bullet points. Specifically, remember the best vehicle safety feature is still a safe driver. Drive so you never need to use your anti-lock braking system, and if you need it, ABS could help to prevent a serious crash. Let's talk about strobe lights. So strobe lights are on some school buses, and these strobe lights are overhead and are used when you have limited visibility. So make note of that. So the overhead strobe light is used when you have limited visibility. And so you have a little switch on your dashboard to turn on and off your strobe light. So if it is snowy, foggy, rainy, that strobe light helps other people see you from a distance. 10.7.2, driving in high winds. Make note that specifically when driving in high winds, that the side of a school bus acts like a sail on a sailboat, and strong winds can push the school bus sideways. They can even move the school bus off the road in extreme conditions. They can also tip it over. So if you're caught in strong winds, keep a strong grip on the steering wheel. Try to anticipate those gusts. You should slow down to lessen the effect of the wind and pull off the roadway and wait. It's important to note that winds may be specifically worse, or there may be stronger winds specifically when you're coming out of tunnels. That may be a question on the test. Now let's talk about backing, 10.7.3. So it says backing a school bus is strongly discouraged, not prohibited, but strongly discouraged. It said you should back your bus only when you have no other safe way to move the vehicle. You should never back a bus when students are outside of the bus. Backing is dangerous and increases your risk of collision. If you have no choice, you must back your bus, you must follow these procedures. Specifically, you post a lookout. Elsewhere in the book, they may call this a helper. And the purpose of the lookout is to warn you about obstacles, any approaching persons or other vehicles, but they should not give directions on how to back the bus. You signal for quiet on the bus. You constantly check all mirrors and rear windows. You back slowly and smoothly. If no lookout is available, you set the parking brake, turn off the motor, take the keys with you, and walk to the rear of the bus to determine if the way is clear. If you must back up at a student pickup point, be sure to pick up the students before backing and watch for latecomers at all times. Be sure that all students are in the bus before backing, and if you must back up at a student drop-off point, be sure to unload students after backing. We also have a tail swing. So 10.7.4 mentions a tail swing. It says a school bus can have up to a 3-foot tail swing. So you should check your mirrors before and during any turning movements to monitor the tail swing. So between the rear tire and the rear bumper, we have this space that when we are turning, specifically when we are turning right, our tail can go into the lane beside us. And if we're not paying attention to this, it can hit the vehicle next to us. And we'll learn how to navigate that in behind the wheel training, but specifically know if there's a question that a school bus has up to a 3-foot tail swing. Next, make note of on page 136, we go 1, 2, 3 paragraphs down that start with the school bus endorsement. This just gives you a little more information on the school bus endorsement or the Illinois school bus permit, specifically noting that drivers transporting students for class-related activities in first division vehicles, or we call Division 1, so a cab, SUV, minivan, must have the proper class of Illinois school bus permit indicated on their driver's license. It says that an SBP applicant must, and it gives a series of requirements for school bus permit applicants. So if you are reviewing this chapter 10 in preparation for getting your school bus permit, review this information so you are familiar with what the requirements are. It also says on page 137 that prior to being issued the initial school bus permit, the driver will also be required to complete a school bus driver training safety course outlined by the Illinois State Board of Education, successfully passing background check and physical. And so you know that is all part of the process of becoming a Division I driver for us at North Shore Transit. It says here, after initially obtaining the SBP, there are annual requirements to obtain the permit to transport Illinois students, and you can ask our SEO if you have any questions about what those requirements are. So Illinois school bus safety information, some general things to know. First is the pre-trip inspection. Just like with other commercial motor vehicles, each day that a vehicle is operated, we do a pre-trip inspection. So for a school bus, same thing is true. Each day that a school bus is operated, the driver must conduct a pre-trip inspection of the vehicle. It says a person other than the driver may perform the pre-trip inspection as prescribed by administrative rule. And so in North Shore Transit, you will discover that our mechanics do the under the hood inspection and our drivers then do the rest of the pre-trip inspection. It says that the driver is required to complete a school bus driver's pre-trip inspection form each time an inspection is performed, and any defects found on the bus must be recorded on the form. So make note of this, as this is a requirement for us as drivers, either Division I or school buses. Also make note of speed limits. It says the legal speed limit for a school bus is the same as that for an automobile. However, because of its size and weight, the bus requires a greater stopping distance than the regular passenger vehicle. So you must adjust your speed for the time of day, weather, and road conditions. Make note of that. Make note that when you should be adjusting your speed. So for time of day, weather, and road conditions. The maximum speed you can go is usually no faster than the cars around you, but the maximum speed of that particular road is going to be the speed limit. This last section says get them there safely, and this is an excellent section to review before you take your test, as it includes just about everything that is a part of this section. So it says proper use of safety devices on the school bus will help you control traffic when stopped to load and unload students. So here it reminds you about the amber lights, which are part of the 8-way flashing system, must be activated at least 100 feet within an urban area or 200 feet outside an urban area, or you may also see that terminology as rural area would be outside an urban area. It says when loading or unloading passengers come to a complete stop, put the transmission in neutral or park and set the parking brake. It says here that no child may cross any highway with 4 or more lanes. Pay attention to the number. So with 4 or more lanes of traffic where at least 1 or more lanes travel in the opposite direction. The school bus must be situated so that the student's residence or the school is on the right side of the highway. It says the driver must let students off the school bus only at their assigned stops. While this practice is designed to provide the highest level of protection for you and your passengers, restricting additional stops also will save fuel. It says do not change routes or pickups without authorization from the proper school official. It says the service door must be closed at all times when the bus is in motion, as we don't want to risk anyone falling out. It also says the emergency door must be unlocked but securely latched when the school bus is in operation. It's important to know that emergency door, whether you have a side emergency door or a rear emergency door, that it is not locked, as you need that to be unlocked in case there is an emergency. But it should be securely latched so that it's not flapping open or flying open. Next, pay attention to the bullet point that says that the driver may not back a bus at the school while students are in the vicinity unless a responsible person is present to guide the bus driver. And there may be times where you may have to reposition the bus that may involve backing, in which case, make sure you have a responsible person present to guide the bus driver. Also, when loading at school, the bus may not be driven onto the school grounds to discharge pupils, or they should be discharged so they will not have to cross a street. At all discharge points where it is necessary for pupils to cross a roadway, the driver must direct students to walk at least 10 feet in front of the bus on the shoulder of the highway and remain there until signal is given by the bus driver for students to cross. The student should be looking to you as the driver to ensure that it is safe to cross a street. It says the driver must not allow a student to get off the bus in any place other than their designated discharge point unless written permission is granted from the proper school official. We flip over to page 138, and just a couple things to make note is that the driver must stop between 15 and 50 feet of the first rail of a railroad crossing. The driver's safety belt must always be properly fastened before putting the bus in motion. And then after parking the bus for the day, the driver must walk through the bus to ensure that no child is left behind. We call that the child check. This concludes just a quick review of Section 10 and what you need to know to either get your school bus endorsement or to get your school bus permit to drive Division I vehicles. Hope this was helpful, and be sure to look for future videos that include visual aids for some of these concepts. Thank you.